The purpose of this presentation is to provide a user-friendly resource and general guidance to the Program Office Contracting Officer's representatives who compile the necessary elements of a purchase request package. This information is targeted primarily towards cores and technical experts who seek supplies and simple services. This presentation highlights what both a sole source and brand name justification are, when they are needed, and the contents necessary to present a satisfactory justification. Technical personnel and requisitioners are responsible for providing the necessary data to support their recommendation for other than full and open competition. The contracting officer determines whether the recommendation is acceptable. Before we identify the elements of the sole source and the brand name justification, let's first briefly review who the players are and what their responsibilities are in this process. The contracting officer is the sole designated government representative to industry whose independent decisions can bind the government. The CO also serves as a business advisor to the program office through the core. The CO reviews, edits, and makes suggestions to the sole source drafter for government business sense and completeness. The core has a few delegated contractual duties designated in writing by the CO. The core should be the program's project manager or representative who is monitoring the work to be completed in the contract. However, in the pre-award phase, the core creates the purchase request by supplying the necessary information in the purchase request package and working as a single voice from the program office. Although this briefing will not cover the procurement process itself, an overview of the major steps are included for both the core and the CO. In addition to the duties of the CO described in the previous slide, due to agencies not fully complying with SECA, the courts have made the following determination. Contracting officers have a duty to promote and provide for competition and to provide the most advantageous contract for the government. In their role of promoting and providing for competition, contracting officials must act affirmatively to obtain and safeguard competition. They cannot take a passive approach and remain in a non-competitive position where there could be reasonably take steps to enhance competition. As stated in previous training videos, the CO requires a complete purchase request package prior to drafting the solicitation. To avoid further delays, in the instance where restricting competition is permitted by law, a complete and detailed sole source or brand name justification are part of the purchase request package. The content format template is available on the BIA Acquisitions website. The core is advised to work with a CO to design a satisfactory justification prior to submitting it in the PR package. The Competition and Contracting Act mandates full and open competition for all contracts awarded with appropriated funds. This act passed in 1984 to promote more competition for government contracts. With competition, the government can leverage better prices. SECA also permits 7 exceptions when full and open competition is not possible. We'll cover those in the next slide. Due to the nature of its mission, the Department of the Interior may also use the Buy Indian set-aside. This is not part of SECA, but it is in compliance with SECA. Also, in certain circumstances, signed determinations and findings have been completed which allow certain BI school curriculum items to be excluded from competition. If this applies to you, be sure to include the DNF in your purchase request package. At present, there are no other circumstances permitting restriction of competition. Therefore, if you have another circumstance, a complete justification and approval must be submitted in the PR package. What is a sole source? It is defined as an acquisition for a contract of purchase of supplies or services that is entered into or proposed to be entered into by an agency after soliciting and negotiating with only one source. Even in our personal lives, we can see how it makes sense to look at several cars, houses, or daycares before we commit to one. We can also find a better life cycle process when we compare prices, models, features, labor rates, etc. It is the same with government contracts, only we are spending taxpayer dollars, so we must be even more diligent. However, SECA permits 7 exceptions with justifications and approval. In the next slide, we'll talk about the 3 most used exceptions. Only one responsible source. While this also covers brand name justifications, I'm going to discuss that separately because it can, under the right circumstances, be mitigated so a J&A is not required. Unusual and compelling urgency. This authority requires we request quotes from as many potential sources as we can under the circumstances. So, in this case, it may not be limited to a single vendor whom we solicit, but as many as time may permit. This exception is further limited in that it can only cover the time necessary for the urgent and compelling need. The maximum period of performance is 1 year unless the head of the agency determines circumstances permit otherwise. Please note, all 7 exceptions require a written J&A except for awards made under 6.3052-5 to Ability 1 under authorized or required by statute exception. As mentioned many times before, it doesn't matter how many resellers there are. If there is one manufacturer, the product is a brand name. This is a sole source because it is a single manufacturer who sets the price. By now, it should be clear that limiting the competition is in violation of SECA. FAR 11.105 states, agency requirements shall not be written so as to require a particular brand name, product, or feature of a product peculiar to one manufacturer, thereby precluding consideration of a product manufactured by another company. An exception to this rule is allowed only if there is a written justification and a particular brand name, product, or feature is essential to the government's requirements, and market research indicates that other companies' similar products or products lacking the feature do not meet or cannot be modified to meet the agency's needs. But most of what we buy is commercial items, commonly on the shelves. How can we describe our requirement so we get a chair when we need a chair? In order to avoid writing the lengthy justification and approval process, we can instead, for items known commonly by a brand name, identify the salient characteristics and compete the requirement to meet those salient minimum needs. When the contracting officer identifies in the solicitation its brand name or equal, and the salient characteristics must be published in the solicitation. This published justification is signed and certified as complete, true, and accurate by the requisitioner. Vendors may submit quotes on the brand name or an equivalent that matches all the salient characteristics advertised. When the solicitation closes, the government evaluation team will be able to determine if the equal meets the government's minimum salient needs, or the CO may, after fair evaluation, award to the brand name. What are salient characteristics? They are the distinguishing characteristics of the product. If you can't identify them, it's time to do more market research. Let's do a quick overview of market research. At a minimum, it answers the following questions. Overall, it should give us a good sense of what is on the marketplace, and it is mandatory for all J&As. The following language is not guaranteed to approve sole source or brand name justifications, but it can help you understand when sole source may be appropriate. Statements that a contractor has the best capability, offers the lowest price, or is the only qualified source are not bases for sole source. Such determinations can only be made through competitive acquisitions. Furthermore, a statement that claims it is cost prohibitive to bring in another source is usually not acceptable without substantial market research. A strong presentation which merely establishes that the recommended source is a most highly qualified to perform, but does not establish why other sources cannot perform, is unacceptable. The rationale supporting the justification must detail a compelling reason for sole source rather than because we want to or it's what we've always done. Here are several other common but unsubstantiated justifications. In summary, the federal government uses taxpayer dollars to operate. The expenditure of these funds are subject to the Competition and Contracting Act. The Act requires agencies to promote and use competition when awarding contracts. Should you have any questions regarding the justification and approval, or if it's brand name or sole source, or even the procurement process, kindly contact your local acquisition professional.